Good evening. Albert Einstein was quoted as saying, "Wisdom is not a product of schooling, but of the lifelong attempt to acquire it." Earlier in the summer, Ryan had sent out an email to, I'm not sure who all, I know I was on the list, and I failed to respond to you, and I apologize for that. What he was doing was requesting that maybe throughout the summer, we have some on Sunday nights, have some guys present lessons on basically just maybe different pieces of wisdom or things that maybe sayings that you heard growing up, or maybe experiences or stories, tying in with the theme of the year of training up a child. And so I failed to respond to that, and I thought tonight, I'm going to kind of take that model and kind of use that and go through a couple of different either experiences that I've had or phrases that I've heard that I think have some strong spiritual application to them when you stop and think about them. So I hope tonight's lesson will be something encouraging. Might even be a little humorous at times, but I hope that the things we talk about tonight will be something that will be good to think on. The first one that I'm going to start with is not really a saying that was even directed at me. It was kind of directed at my sister. By my father, who would tell her, she would be washing the dishes. Don't ask me how. Somehow I was able to usually get out of washing the dishes, but my sister wasn't so lucky. But my dad would make comments to her about, you got to take this washing dishes seriously, because people are going to make a judgment on you. And so even doing something, a task such as washing the dishes, you need to do well, because people are going to make a judgment on you on how well you do things. And so, that was something that always, well, it wasn't a comment that was necessarily directed at me. It was something that always kind of stuck in the back of my mind as far as how I approach things. And I think there's two lessons that I take from that. And I'd like to turn our attention to one of them, Luke chapter 16. Many of us are familiar with this passage, this parable of the dishonest manager. There was this rich man, and he had a manager who had squandered his possessions. And it's mentioned in verse 10. It says, "The one who is faithful in very little is also faithful in much, and one who is dishonest in very little is also dishonest in much. If then you have not been faithful in the unrighteous wealth, who will entrust to you the true riches? And if you have not been faithful in that which is another's, who will give that which is your own?" And so one of the things that I take from that is just the idea of, if you want things that are bigger, or you want things that are better maybe than your current state, it's important to do the little things well. And that's not just a recommendation for maybe young people. That's true for all of us. That's true for me in my job. If I want to maybe get promoted, I need to be able to do maybe some smaller things, and I need to be able to do them well. And so I think that's something that I always took away from that instruction that my father would, again, provide to my sister usually. But there's something else that comes to mind when I think about, because we joke about that in our house at different times between my sister and I. But the way that we handle things, the way we do things, says something about us. And it can also say something perhaps about God as others are watching us, and they are going to make a judgment about us. Passage that comes to mind is Titus in the 2nd chapter, where Paul is giving instruction really to younger men. In verse 6 of chapter 2, he writes, "Likewise, urge the younger men to be self-controlled. Show yourself in all respects to be a model of good works, and in your teaching show integrity, dignity, and sound speech that cannot be condemned, so that an opponent may be able to put you to shame, having nothing evil to say about us." I like that wording that Paul has there about a model of good works. And so how do we handle things? How we handle things, what does that say about us? Because people are certainly going to be paying attention to us. And so let's give them something positive to say about us. Well, another, and these are not necessarily really in any particular order, but there's a coworker that I had a few years back, and he had a phrase that he mentioned to me. I don't even remember how it came up in some of our discussions, but he said, "You got to pray like it depends on God, and you got to work like it depends on you." And that was something that has kind of stuck with me over the last few years. Pray like it depends on God. Work like it depends on you. This is a statement that suggests a faith and a trust in God. And certainly we see that idea at different times, certainly throughout Scripture. An example that certainly comes to mind for me is thinking about Abraham. Genesis chapter 22, you remember that God puts Abraham to the test, and he wants him to offer his only son, Isaac. Starting in verse 4 of chapter 22, it says, "On the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. Then Abraham said to his young men, 'Stay here with the donkey. I and the boy will go over there and worship and come again to you.' And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son, and he took it in his hand, the fire and the knife. So they went both of them together. And Isaac said to his father Abraham, 'My father.' And he said, 'Here I am, my son.' He said, 'Behold, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering?' Abraham said, 'God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son.' So they went both of them together." And I think most of us are familiar with this story, how Abraham is about to go through with this act, this command that God had given to him. He is going to offer his only son, Isaac. And just imagine what that must have been like. Just unimaginable. And obviously, as you know the story, Abraham is stopped from doing this, and he winds up calling this place "the Lord will provide." And I think about different times where I've been maybe uneasy or unsure or things like that, and this passage is something that comes to mind, that God will provide. Another passage that comes to mind, I won't turn right now, but 1 Peter chapter 5, where Peter encourages us to cast our cares upon God, verses 6 through 7. So that statement, there's a component of having faith in God and a trust in God. But there's also a point of that phrase that suggests that I have responsibility with certain things, and so I trust in God. I pray to God. But then there are times in certain things and situations that it requires me to take action as well. In our house, growing up, it was always kind of a little bit of a joke with friends of mine. It wasn't uncommon to hear my dad talk about slugs. There was often comments, that person is acting like a slug, or don't be a slug. And I always thought that was kind of funny, but it certainly left an impression on me, and it's in fact one that is biblical. If you turn to Proverbs, the 6th chapter. It's recorded starting in verse 6. Go to the ant, O sluggard, consider her ways and be wise. Without having any chief officer or ruler, she prepares her bread in summer and gathers her food in harvest. How long will you lie there, O sluggard? When will you arise from your sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come upon you like a robber, and want like an armed man. And so I have responsibilities that I need to take ownership of. I trust in God, I believe in God, but then I also combine that with my own responsibilities. I think about this passage, I think about the passage or the sermon that Ryan gave a few weeks back on the woman of Proverbs Chapter 31, and just how industrious she was, and how that is something that we see as a biblical concept of being industrious and taking ownership. There's a lot of benefits for us in doing that. We provide for our needs. We provide options for ourselves. So you're thinking about, as maybe a younger person, you're thinking about what you might be doing in the future. There's preparation, and there's training that you may have to go through as well that provides options in addition to stability for you. Also think about the benefit to society. When you think about just people that take ownership of things and provide for and take care of things. If everybody did the opposite, we'd have a huge problem. And so that's not what God desires for mankind. But pray like it depends on God, work like it depends on you. Next one that I want to talk about comes from my high school days. I had a football coach that did have a phrase that he mentioned to us over and over and over again. And it's kind of interesting as I think back and I consider that time. It started in our summer practices and conditioning, and it went through the entire season. And he had this phrase that he said, "You get better or you get worse, but you never stay the same." And that was almost became a little bit of a theme for that team that I was on. And so we were constantly challenging ourselves in different things to each day be trying to get better, trying to improve. And of course, he would frequently have this statement to remind us of that thought. And so it was certainly motivating to me at that time. But as I think about that, it's a very biblical concept. I think we see that in what Peter wrote in 2 Peter chapter 1, in a passage that we're all, I think most of us are very familiar with. But think about these things that Peter writes here. Starting in verse 5, he says, "For this reason, make every effort to supplement your faith with virtue, and virtue with knowledge, and knowledge with self-control, and self-control with steadfastness, and steadfastness with godliness, and godliness with brotherly kindness, and brotherly affection with love. For if these qualities are yours and are increasing, they keep you from being ineffective or unfruitful in the knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ. For whoever lacks these qualities is so nearsighted that he is blind, having forgotten that he was cleansed from his former sins. Therefore, brothers, be all the more diligent to confirm your calling and election, for if you practice these qualities, you will never fall." So I think there's application to that statement in many ways within our life, and certainly improving ourselves. And certainly from a spiritual perspective, I think I see this in this passage that Peter wrote. Not that we're perfect all the time. We know that's not going to be the case. But we have a mindset of constantly trying to add these qualities, be improving in these qualities. The fact that he talks about this, and he says, if you're not doing these things, you've forgotten what was done for you. And that is at least in my opinion, a very humbling thought that can make you stop and think and maybe reevaluate things. All right, the next experience I want to share with you, this involves Angel. We were at my parents' house for Thanksgiving. This was, I believe, our first year of marriage. And she came home the Friday after Thanksgiving. She had gone out doing some shopping and stuff with my mom and my sister. And she came back. She was very excited about some Christmas decorations that she acquired. They're called Billy Buttons. If you don't know about that, you can ask her about that. But she was incredibly excited about this. And she came into the house. She was all excited. And let's just say I didn't respond with the appropriate enthusiasm for Billy Buttons. And she had a few things to say about that. And she kind of stormed through the living room. And my dad was there. And he just turns to me and he goes, "Well, did we learn something from that?" And so, I sit back and I think about that experience, and it's funny, again, something that we joke about in my family, but I think there's a spiritual thought that can be there. And this is certainly maybe, if you're younger, you may not be thinking about marriage, but at some point, that may be something that you're considering. And it reminds me of instruction that Peter gives, 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 7, as he's talking about relationships with husbands and wives. And he makes this statement specifically to husbands. And so I think this is something that men, we need to really take notice of. And I think this is true for both husbands and wives, but he directs this specifically to husbands. And he says in verse 7, "Likewise, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way, showing honor to the woman as the weaker vessel, since they are heirs with you of the grace of life, so that your prayers may not be hindered." And there is a lot that can be applied when you think about, if you take time to think about, what does that look like? What does that mean? There is much that can be applied, both for husbands and wives. But thinking about knowing what pleases them, knowing what motivates them, understanding their fears, their dreams, their passions. And so I would say, study each other, know each other, and put that knowledge to use. I think people that are able to do that, the people that couples that I know of and can think of that, I go, they have a great life together, a great marriage. I think they do these types of things, and there's certainly a lot of value in doing that. I'd like to share another. This wasn't necessarily an experience that I had. This is more kind of coming from Angel, but her grandfather served in World War II, served in Japan. And I'd always thought it was interesting. He dealt with Alzheimer's, but if you sat down and talked to him, he could tell you details of World War II like it was yesterday. And she shared something with me that I thought I'd include in the message for tonight. Is she was, many people that served in World War II, if you talk to them, they don't have exactly a liking for Japanese. And I mean, just as humans, as men and women, that can be somewhat understandable. And her grandfather wasn't any different in that. He had a distaste for Japanese. But a few years after the war, he winded up actually working with a Japanese person who, they got to know each other, and they got to learn a bit about each other. And this individual said to her grandfather, he said, I was so thankful that the war came to an end because I was slated to be a kamikaze pilot. And, that I think her grandfather emphasized to her that, I got to know this person, and it changed things. And it brings to mind for me the golden rule that is recorded in Matthew chapter 7, where Jesus said, "So whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets." And you just think about a simple statement like that, what kind of impact that can have. What can that have in our homes? What kind of impact can that have in our church? What kind of impact that can have in the workplace or in the school or on an organization, communities, nations? Changes things when we know people. And so take that as a lesson when you think about just different relationships that you have, or maybe the way you've been treated at different times. All right, I think we've got two more that I'm going to share, and then the lesson will be complete tonight. But another thing from is a poem that I acquired when I was in high school. I'm going to read it here in just a minute. So again, I think it has some spiritual connotation. I'll bring up a couple of passages that at least come to mind for me. But the title of the poem is called "Don't Quit," and it's the author, I believe, is unknown. At least every copy I've seen suggests that. But we live in a society where quitting can be a bit of a default. When things get difficult, when things get hard, I just quit, or I won't see something through to the end when difficulties arise. And while that may be the easy thing to do, that's not always the best thing or the right thing. And sometimes we have to be willing to go through a little bit of pain for what might be best or what might be right. And so I'd like to share this poem with you. Again, this is something that came across it when I was in high school, and I've referred to it, at different times. I've always had a copy of it, and it's been something that's been motivational to me, certainly. It says, "When things go wrong, as they sometimes will, when the road you're trudging seems all uphill, when the funds are low and the debts are high, and you want to smile, but you have to sigh, when care is pressing you down a bit, rest if you must, but don't quit. Life is queer with its twists and turns, and every one of us sometimes learns. And many a failure turns about, when he might have won had he stuck it out. Don't give up, though the pace seems slow. You may succeed with another blow. Success is failure turned inside out, the silver tint of the clouds of doubt. And you never can tell how close you are. It may be near when it seems so far. So stick to the fight when you're hardest hit. It's when things seem worse that you must not quit." I think there are some things from the book of Proverbs that at least echo this thought to some degree. Proverbs Chapter 3, which has really become probably my favorite, most motivating passage. I think I've shared that with some people, maybe kids in the high school class. But in verse 5 and 6, it says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths." Also, Proverbs chapter 24, this verse here that I think really resonates with this poem that we just looked at. I think it's interesting, this description that's given here. It says, actually, I'll start in verse 15, where it says, "Lie not in wait at a wicked man against the dwelling of the righteous. Do no violence to his home. For the righteous falls 7 times and rises again, but the wicked stumble in times of calamity." That idea of the righteous falling 7 times, but continuing to get up, continuing to strive, to excel, to pursue. And certainly this idea can be applied in so many things, both from a spiritual standpoint, from a physical standpoint, but don't quit. All right, and the final one that I want to mention tonight, and it will tie into the invitation. If you know Angel, she likes to read. And I have not read this, but it was, I was talking to her about what I was going to be talking about, and she mentioned this line from one of the Anne of Green Gables books. And it says, "Tomorrow is always fresh with no mistake." And I thought about that, and I thought, there is, at least for me, something very exhilarating, powerful at the start of a new day. You can have things be terrible the day before, but a new day brings hope. I used to never really consider myself a morning person. I still don't know that I'd consider myself a morning person, but I certainly have found that may be my most productive period of the day. So if I really need to focus in on things, if I really need to get something done, I'm getting up early. Sometimes that's 4, sometimes it's 5. It can vary, but if I got to get something done, you can believe that I'm going to be up early. It's a time of quiet, and I can think and reflect. But beyond that, I don't know, there's just something about getting up early, seeing the sun rise, and it's this idea of freshness and of hope that a new day brings. And certainly, I think that's think that's inspiring when you think about things, and maybe you are having problems or challenges, and just thinking that, you know what, tomorrow's a new day. Things could change tomorrow. Tomorrow could be completely different. It brings hope. And certainly when we think about spiritual things, hope is throughout the entire Bible, specifically because of Jesus. Jesus brings hope to mankind. I'd like to finish tonight with one more passage from 1 Peter chapter 1. Starting in verse 3, Peter writes, "Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. According to his great mercy, he has caused us to be born again to a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, to an inheritance that is imperishable, undefiled, and unfading, kept in heaven for you, who by God's power are being guarded through faith for a salvation ready to be revealed in the last time." God has prepared an inheritance that's imperishable, it does not fade away. We have a living hope because Jesus Christ rose from the grave, victorious. So that gives us a confidence, gives us a hope in what Jesus did for us. And so you may be in the audience tonight, knowing that perhaps your life is not where it needs to be. Maybe you've never become obedient to the gospel, but you know that you're separated from God. That can be changed tonight by becoming obedient to the gospel call and becoming baptized and becoming a Christian tonight because of what Jesus did. You might be in the audience tonight and maybe you've made that commitment. You've made that choice to obey the gospel, but there's been different things that have come up that have changed where you're at spiritually. And maybe you're not where things need to be right now with God. You too can change that tonight. That's something that needs to be brought forward to before the congregation. We can pray for you and with you. And so if you're subject to the invitation, please come forward as we stand and as we sing.